The snow falling over Manhattan on Christmas Eve is supposed to be magical, like a scene trapped inside a high-end crystal globe. But inside our penthouse, the air was brittle enough to snap. I sat across the mahogany desk from my husband, Arthur Sterling, the man I had spent 12 years of my life building into a legend. Between us sat a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a Christmas card. It was a formal personnel notice, salary suspension. Promotion postponed. Review for professional misconduct. Arthur didn't look like a husband. He looked like a CEO pruning a dead branch. "You will apologize to Sarah tonight," he said, his voice as flat as a dial tone. "In front of the board. In front of the guests. Or you will lose your paycheck, your title, and your future at Sterling Biotics. There is no middle ground, Eliza." I looked at him, searching for a trace of the man I'd married in a courthouse when we had $40 between us. That man was gone. Success hadn't just changed Arthur, it had replaced him with a stranger who mistook arrogance for authority. The woman he wanted me to apologize to was Sarah Vance, a woman half my age, with a quarter of my experience, who had been mentored by Arthur in late-night sessions that had nothing to do with science and everything to do with betrayal. "And if I don't?" I asked. My voice was a whisper, but it didn't shake. "Then this becomes very difficult for you," Arthur replied, leaning back in his Italian leather chair. "You think you're indispensable because you're a scientist. But I'm the one who sells the dream. And Sarah is the one who helps me dream it. You're just the logistics. And logistics can be outsourced. To understand how we got here, you have to understand that I was never just the wife. I was the architect. I came from a world of quiet labs and rigorous data, a world where facts didn't care about your feelings. When Arthur and I started Sterling Biotics, it was my research that secured the initial funding. It was my nights spent over a microscope that led to the breakthroughs he touted on CNBC. For years, I was happy to be the foundation. I didn't need the spotlight. I liked the silence of the lab. I liked knowing that our treatments were actually saving lives. But as the company grew from a 3-person startup to a billion-dollar titan, Arthur's ego grew with it. He started believing his own press releases. He started thinking he was the source of the brilliance, rather than the megaphone for it. He began to view my insistence on clinical accuracy as negativity. He viewed my concerns about safety protocols as resistance to growth. He wanted a yes man. Or rather, a yes woman. And then came Sarah Vance. Sarah was a brand strategist, which in our world meant she was very good at making empty promises look like revolutionary breakthroughs. She was young, she was polished, and she treated Arthur like he was the smartest man on the planet. I caught them 3 months ago, not through a cheap text message, but through the company's expense reports. 5-star hotels in Paris when he was supposed to be at a conference in Berlin. A diamond necklace that certainly hadn't ended up around my neck. I didn't confront him then. In science, when you find a toxin, you don't scream at it. You isolate it. You study its patterns. You prepare a cure. Downstairs, the Christmas gala was in full swing. I could hear the muffled thrum of a jazz quartet and the high-pitched tinkling of champagne flutes. These people believed they were celebrating a corporate miracle. They didn't know the miracle was about to be dismantled. "The board is waiting, Eliza," Arthur said, checking his Rolex. "Sarah is downstairs. She's hurt. She says your aggressive questioning of her marketing plan created a hostile work environment. An apology fixes this. It keeps the peace. It keeps your job." Aggressive questioning? I laughed, a dry, bitter sound. I asked her to explain the statistical margin of error on her growth projections, and she started crying because she didn't know what the words meant. "Enough." Arthur slammed his hand on the desk. "She is the future of the brand. You are the past. Now, do we go down there and fix this, or do I sign this notice?" I looked at the window, watching the snow coat the city in white. I thought about the bags I had packed and hidden in the trunk of my car 2 days ago. I thought about the meeting I'd had with Arthur's father, Richard, the chairman of the board, who still remembered that science was about truth, not trends. Okay, I said. Arthur's posture relaxed immediately. A smug, condescending smile spread across his face. He actually thought he'd broken me. He thought the threat of losing my paycheck was enough to make me bow to his mistress. Good girl. I knew you'd see reason. Let's go make this right. We walked down the grand staircase together. Arthur's hand was on the small of my back, a gesture that was meant to look loving but felt like a leash. The ballroom was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. In the center of the room stood Sarah, wearing a red dress that was entirely too loud for a corporate event. She was holding a martini, surrounded by a group of junior executives who were hanging on her every word. When she saw us, she tucked a lock of hair behind her ear and looked down at her shoes, playing the role of the wounded victim to perfection. Arthur led me right to her. The music didn't stop, but the conversation in our immediate circle died down. People knew there was tension. They wanted to see the fallout. Sarah, Arthur said loudly, his voice booming with fake warmth. Eliza has something she'd like to say to you regarding the misunderstanding in the boardroom yesterday. Sarah looked up, her eyes wide and wet. Oh, Arthur, she doesn't have to. No, I interrupted, stepping forward. I felt a strange, cold clarity. I absolutely do. I looked at Sarah, then at Arthur, then at the 3 board members who were standing nearby, including Richard, who was watching me with an unreadable expression. I want to apologize, I said, my voice carrying across the silent circle. I want to apologize for expecting professional competence in a room where it clearly isn't valued. I apologize for thinking that Sterling Biotics was still a company built on science rather than personal favors. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was deafening. Arthur's face turned a shade of purple I'd only ever seen in a medical textbook. Sarah's jaw literally dropped. Eliza. Arthur hissed, his grip on my arm tightening. What are you doing? I'm resigning, Arthur, I said, stepping out of his reach. Effective immediately. And since I'm no longer an employee, I don't think I'll be staying for the rest of the party. I didn't wait for a response. I walked through the crowd, my head held high, the red soles of my shoes clicking rhythmically against the marble. I could hear Arthur calling my name, his voice rising in panic as he realized the submission he'd promised the board had just turned into a public execution of his reputation. I walked out the front door, handed my valet ticket to the attendant, and climbed into my car. I didn't look back at the penthouse. I didn't look back at the life I'd spent 12 years building. As I drove toward the airport, my phone began to buzz incessantly. It was Arthur. Then it was Sarah. Then it was the company's head of PR. I ignored them all. What Arthur didn't know, what he was about to find out in approximately 20 minutes, was that I hadn't just resigned. Earlier that day, I had sent a 400-page dossier to the SEC and the board of directors. It contained every creative accounting move Arthur had made to fund Sarah's marketing budget. It contained the raw data from the failed clinical trials that Sarah had tried to rebrand as successes. And most importantly, it contained a signed contract from the European Research Council. Richard, Arthur's father, had seen the writing on the wall months ago. He knew Arthur was compromising the company. He had quietly offered me a position as the managing director of our new Zurich-based division, a division that held all the intellectual property for our most successful patents. I wasn't just leaving Arthur. I was taking the brain of the company with me. The flight to Switzerland was the first time I had slept through the night in 3 years. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending a lie is a truth, and once I let go of the marriage and the New York office, that weight vanished. Zurich was cold, clinical, and perfect. My office overlooked the lake, a serene expanse of blue that didn't demand anything from me. For the first few months, I worked 16-hour days, not out of desperation, but out of joy. I was back in the lab. I was surrounded by researchers who didn't care about branding or market sentiment. They cared about the efficacy of a molecule. I heard rumors from New York, of course. Arthur was struggling. Without me to verify the technical details of his pitches, he was floundering. Investors were starting to ask questions he couldn't answer. Sarah's fresh perspectives were costing the company millions in failed launches. But I stayed silent. I didn't leak stories. I didn't post on social media. I let the silence do the work. In science, we call it delayed reaction. Sometimes the most volatile chemicals take time to explode. You just have to be far enough away when they do. 6 months into my new life, the explosion finally happened. Sterling Biotics announced a massive recall on their flagship product, the very one Sarah had insisted on rushing to market. The stock price didn't just dip, it cratered. I was sitting in a cafe in Zurich, sipping a coffee, when my phone rang. It was Arthur. I hadn't spoken to him since that night in Manhattan. "Clara," he said. His voice sounded older, thinner. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, jagged edge of panic. "I need you to come back. The board is calling for a vote of no confidence. Richard won't talk to me." Sarah left. She took a job with a competitor and took half the marketing team with her. I looked at the mountains in the distance. "You told me I was the past, Arthur. You told me I was just logistics. Surely Sarah's vision can fix a little thing like a federal recall?" "Please," he whispered. "I'll give you whatever you want. Co-CEO. A seat on the board. We can fix the marriage. We can go back to how it was." "That's the thing about science, Arthur," I said quietly. "Some reactions are irreversible. You can't unburn a bridge. And you certainly can't unbetray a partner." I hung up. I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel revenge in the way people describe it in movies. I just felt finished. A year later, Sterling Biotics was restructured. Arthur was ousted, his reputation in tatters. Richard stepped back in as interim CEO, but the first thing he did was fly to Zurich to see me. We sat in a small chocolate shop, the smell of cocoa and sugar filling the air. "He hates you, you know," Richard said, a sad smile on his face. "He thinks you planned this from the start." "I didn't plan for him to be unfaithful, Richard," I replied. "I didn't plan for him to choose a marketing girl over clinical data. I just planned for what I would do if he did. I wasn't the one who destroyed the company. He did that the moment he decided that loyalty was a luxury he couldn't afford." Richard nodded. He pushed a folder across the table toward me. "The board wants you back. Not as a researcher. As the CEO. They want the architect to come home and rebuild the house." I looked at the folder. A year ago, I would have jumped at it. I would have seen it as the ultimate vindication. But now? "I'm staying here, Richard," I said. "I've started my own firm. We're small, we're quiet, and we're doing work that actually matters. I don't need the Sterling name anymore. I have my own." People think revenge is about making the other person suffer. But as I walked back to my lab that afternoon, I realized that true revenge is becoming so successful and so at peace that the other person's suffering doesn't even interest you. Arthur spent the next few years in and out of courtrooms. Sarah Vance faded into obscurity, her brand forever tarnished by the recall. And me? I became the woman I was always meant to be before I started shrinking myself to fit into Arthur's shadow. Every Christmas Eve, I go down to the lake. I watch the snow fall, and I remember that one word, okay. It wasn't a word of surrender. It was a word of release. Because sometimes, the best way to win a war is to simply refuse to fight in it. You just build a better world somewhere else and let the old one burn itself out. My name is Clara Sterling. No, actually, my name is Clara Vance. I took my maiden name back. I am a scientist, a CEO, and a survivor. I'm sharing this because there are too many women out there who are being told they are just the foundation. There are too many people being threatened with their own paychecks to stay silent about injustice. Don't argue with them. Don't beg for them to see your value. If they don't see it by now, they never will. Just gather your data. Pack your bags. And when they give you an ultimatum, give them exactly what they asked for. Give them the silence they deserve. Because once the foundation walks away, the whole house comes down. And you? You'll be too far away to even hear the crash.